Hello, welcome to the InScope podcast. My name is John Scott. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ScopeStack, the web-based platform to solve all your IT services scoping problems. So I'm very happy to have with me today Dennis Manfra from Internetwork Engineering. Dennis, thank you for joining us, sir.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So for those of you who don't know Dennis, which I don't know why you wouldn't, but Dennis is the VP of Technical Services over at IE, or Internet Network Engineering. He's been over there for about 14 years, and I've seen nothing but good things and high remarks from Dennis from everyone in the industry. So Dennis, I'm happy to have you on and kind of impart some wisdom into our billion podcast subscribers. So again, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate being on here.
Yeah, I might have overdone the number there. It might not be a billion yet.
Not a billion?
Not yet. We're almost there. Yeah, okay. Only a million.
Yeah. You just got to get it going in China, and then it'll
the thing is, like, we've had, like, our first podcast guest was really subpar, and so we're really just kind of getting the cream of the crop, right?
I didn't want to say anything, but...
It's a small world, and we all know each other, so I think we can joke and all know who we're talking about at the same time. But no, man, one thing I wanted to kind of pick your brain on today is probably what to most people is not exactly a riveting topic, but it's something that, like, every single project we get on, it's a consideration, right? And it's really all around pricing, right? And I think today we'll talk majority about, like, project-based pricing. And again, you're responsible for managed services, PMO, projects, like you kind of do it all, right? And so really want to pick your brain on what considerations go into how do you price out a service, right? And some of the business impacts to you as a leader of the business, like how do you set the standard and what do you recommend? So maybe what we could start with is, again, kind of setting the scene, scoping out project-based work. So not talking managed, recurring, or even third party yet. Really the two things, and I guess there's unless there's a new one that I don't know about, right, which might be troublesome, but is really fixed fee projects. So, and I'll let you kind of give some detail on what each one of these are. And then I used to call it T&M, but other people call it T&E. I think you call it T&E. So maybe if you can kind of tell me about what each of those are, and some of the, kind of the thoughts around one versus the other, right? And specifically, the one thing I want to key on at some point is really the risk, right? So there are risk trade-offs with one versus the other between you and then the customer.
Yep, sure. Just kind of kicking off with fixed fee projects, kind of what they are, right? So the idea being that you can gather enough information that then you can put together the deliverables that you're going to do for the customer so they get the outcome that they're looking for. Right. And if you're able to do that, then you can then look at, all right, based on experience, how many hours is going to go into the project? And then what are the other expenses that I might be have in the project, such as maybe travel or project management? And then typically you want to put a risk factor on top of that if things go wrong, that I'm not completely underwater on the project. Right. So that's generally how people do fixed fee projects. They put it all together. Big benefit to the customer is they know the price of the project, right? So it's, all right, what is it going to cost me if I stay within the scope?
Yeah, so you're delivering to your clients a statement of work, proposal, whatever it may be, with $1 amount. Right. Maybe some billing milestones, but, let's say $50,000. That's the price for this project. And what you're saying is you're going to do XYZ work. And again, back to why a tight scope is important, but you're going to do all these things, deliver these outcomes for this price. And the client knows this is the price I'm paying. Right. And sort of like any other kind of nuance around, like, change requests and things like that, they know exactly what they're going to pay you and potentially when they're going to pay you, right? So that's fixed fee in a nutshell.
Fixed fee in a nutshell, right there.
Yeah.
All right, and then T&E or T&M, so time and expenses versus time and material, so whatever, same thing, right? It's hourly work.
Yep.
But the first one, we as the service provider take on the risk, because if things do go south, or we end up having to spend a lot more time than we thought we would, right? We don't get any more money for that unless it's out of scope, right? And that's different.
Yeah.
With the hourly or the T&E or T&M, the customer is supposed to take on the risk. So we can a lot of times give them an estimate and say, hey, we think it's going to take 100 hours to get all this stuff done that you're asking for.
Right.
Maybe a little less, maybe it's going to be more. But what we'll do is we'll work on all these things as agreed for this rate, and then you'll have to just pay what actual work time
you'll
gets
bill
done.
them based on actual work time, right? So you might give them an estimate of 100 hours to your point, but it might be done for 50. I mean, probably not that big of a difference, but
right.
It might be done for 75, right? And so you're going to bill them for just that amount. And again, the problem in that model for them, the customer, is they just don't know exactly where that's going to land, right? Which is why they take on more of the risk versus the service provider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, are you so when you're delivering a time material, I'll just call it hourly for now. When you're delivering an hourly estimate, are you actually scoping that out? Or are you saying, here's at a high level, but it's really upon you as the client to determine how this work goes? How do you handle that piece in an hourly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I tell you, we've evolved over the years, and we're actually at a point, and we have been for quite a while, where we actually avoid doing hourly. And I can get into that in a second.
Yeah.
But when scoping it out, in general, the customer has an expectation that you're going to be close to your estimates. So, it is important. And anybody that's done this work will tell you, when you kind of go in there and say, hey, here's just the rate, and I think it's going to be this. When you go over that, the customer gets upset. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. And no one's happy in that model.
That's right. So even doing that model, you still try to scope it out and say, all right, based on what you're trying to get accomplished, we think it's going to take 100 hours in order to do that. And the other thing we found important, if you are going to deliver in that model, that as you run into things, that you are still telling and communicating to the customer, like, hey, because we ran into this, it's probably going to take us an extra 10 hours. Or because we ran into this, it's going to be 20. And when you do get closer and closer to that 100 hours, you're well ahead of it. I think that's probably one of the bigger things if you're in that model.
That's a huge point.
Not caught by surprise.
Right. Yeah, I mean, telling them, that's an awesome point, actually, just telling them and kind of setting that expectation. But all right, but to go back, so you as a business, and we used to do this majority of the time as well, you as a leader said, hey, we're not doing hourly based projects anymore. We're really focused now on, and it's not so much maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not so much on the fact that it's fixed fee, but you've focused and you've changed towards outcomes. Yeah. Right. You're trying to deliver the outcome that the client wants. And they don't really, do they care if it's fixed fee or T&M? They just want it to be done and achieve that outcome, essentially, right?
Yeah, and mostly what we see is that they do want to be on budget, right? So when we get them to agree to a fixed fee, and they say, okay, the next question is, you're not going to nickel and dime me with scope changes, but because they're saying to their boss or their CFO is hey, for this money, we're going to get these outcomes. And when you do T&E, they still are doing the same thing. So when you start trying to charge them more because it's just going to run over, you're just not going to hit those things. You get a lot of pushback that, hey, well, I don't have the budget for that, or I can't pay for that. As a company early on, probably maybe 10 years ago. So as I was leading that delivery group and watching some of these things in the billing, a lot of the T&E I was getting pushback on, well, you just sent us a bad engineer. If it was a different guy, you could have gotten it done in 10 hours. This guy's 15. And then the sales guys would tend to say, I want to keep them happy. We got this other project on the table. Let's just credit them those hours, right?
Right.
So you end up trying to manage this revenue, coming in and out, and then customer satisfaction, because last time I had Doug, he did a great job. Now you sent me Tom, and Tom did not do a good job. And so when you do fixed fee, you're able to eliminate all that. Like, look, we're going to deliver to that outcome no matter how long it takes us. One guy might be able to do it quicker, one guy a little slower, or we're going to send multiple guys, right? So in order to get it done, it doesn't necessarily have to be a certain person.
Right. Well, and again, like I talked about risk earlier, and it's really, in these fixed fee type projects, you're taking on a majority of that risk, but for the benefit of the client and the customer, right? I mean, there's some benefit in it to you as a business, but yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's kind of like the car salesman approach, like nickel and dime, T&E, like that's not really the behavior, the culture, the flavor, right, that you want to put in a customer's mouth. It's really, we want to work with you, and we're going to take on, what is a more risky billing methodology, pricing methodology, so that you know what you're going to pay, the outcome you're going to get, and we're going to take any overages that potentially will come from that. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. To be able to do that, and come out, in the profit margins that you want on the projects, but more importantly, as services as a whole, which is tend to how I think sometimes gets overlooked, and I'll go into a little bit more of that in a second. But you have the experience, and you got to know, and you got to adapt your pricing models based on delivering the services and what you learn. So, easy examples of some of this stuff that I'm talking about is new technology comes out, say like Cisco ICE. And when first doing those installations, it was hard to know what should we be charging, because you'd think it's this when we did in the lab. And then that was like a technology that when you were, actually doing it, there was a lot of other factors that came in, right? So yeah, the first couple, but if you're set up where you have a system that you're able to learn from your mistakes, and you're able to adopt your pricing models, and how you're going to deliver it, and also the training of the engineers and the project managers to understand how to deliver those projects successfully, and you can adopt all that, you can start to get a lot better at, hey, every time I'm delivering this type of projects, yes, there's a little bit of a variance, but instead of it being 30% when we first started, right now we're down to 5 to 10% per project. Right. And if I can then add a 10% risk on top of that, I'm going to, sometimes I'm going to make out a little bit better. Sometimes I'm going to hit that risk, but usually I'm going to be in that nice sweet spot, and overall I'll be successful.
Well, yeah, and the cool part for you having, ultimate responsibility for both the delivery team and the engineers scoping that, right, is you're probably hearing it that, hey, pre-sales keep scoping stuff. I have no idea what they're handing me. Right. But y'all have reached a level of maturity where, hopefully it's not that, right? It's definitely the post-sales engineering team is actually involved in building out, ICE in a lab to understand like this, that, and the other. And pre-sales could potentially be there as well and say, oh yeah, we need to make sure we call that out. And it's just like collaborative effort around, to your point, making sure that you know what you're doing. You're not trying all this on a client for the first time. Right. Yes. And so that's, I forgot how important like labbing stuff is. I forgot how much we used to do that, right? Especially new technology. So
you got to do it. Yep. Yeah.
And I think for those people that are working with a partner, a service provider, like that's a great question, right? Like, have you deployed this before? If not, have you tested this, labbed it out to a certain extent, right? Like, what have you done prior to you getting engaged in my environment, So
right. Yeah, and then speaking of the risk to the customer, right? So if it is fixed fee and you're delivering that outcome, there is a lot of security from their standpoint that if you did mess it up, or the technology maybe wasn't fully baked and there's a lot more work that you had to do, or whatever the case is, that they don't have that risk, right? You're taking that on as the service provider that for it. So there's some benefit there for the customer to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what I'm trying not to like rush into like all the practical stuff that you could probably help people with. We'll do that at the end, right? That's like our fire round.
Sure.
Nonetheless, but What else comes to mind for you in terms of like each of these models, kind of considerations? Y'all made a decision a long time ago, right, to go fixed fee and really nothing but.
Right.
Was that a hard transition when you made it?
Yeah, the different people in different positions kind of look at it differently and see what the benefits of one versus the other are. So I know, that as the sales team, and even the pre-sales engineers, a lot of times they might look at it and say, you know what, let the customer take the risk of what's happening here and do it hourly, and that's their viewpoint. But when you've delivered a lot of projects, and you start managing the whole cost of all the engineers and the project managers, as your business as a whole, it's a lot better to know where your revenue's coming from and what you can count on and what you can't. So, right. The back to kind of your question about the decision in making it, and getting people maybe on board with it. It was a lot of times of it explaining to the sales team, look, this is why we're going to this model. This is why it makes sense for us as a company, and this is why it makes sense for your customers. Right. And so that's been a struggle for years. And I don't know, sometimes, you get pre-sales engineers that are new to maybe service business. Like sometimes we pick up somebody that's only been doing hardware, as an example. And so they just don't understand the back end of it and why that would be important. And I just to throw out this real quick thing about T&E, I think this is an example that a lot of people can relate to. The engineers have a fixed cost, right? They hardly any of them you're just paying for the hour that they work, right? So we're paying them salary, whether they work or not, whether they bill or not, right? They're getting their salary. And when you sell a T&E deal and potentially you don't have project management because they're like, no, we don't need a project manager. We just need an engineer to come out here. You don't have any oversight on that. And then, all right, well, I'm scheduled to go out to this customer on Monday and they're going to be ready for me. And you send the guy out there, and maybe he does an hour's worth of work and then he comes home. And that's an 8-hour day. So in other words, you missed out on 8 hours of billing to bill 1 hour, right?
So because at that point, like it's really the responsibility of the client to guide them and that person, while, as opposed to like working with someone or an organization like IE that's done this, and you're like, we know all the things that they need to do. You just need to let us come lead this effort and get it done right the first time, right? As opposed to this really being on you.
Yeah, and so when you're able to put a fixed fee in, you'll put the project management time into it as well, right? And so you have that project manager that's guiding the customer and saying, all right, Mr. Customer, my guy's supposed to be out there next Monday. Do you have this ready? Is that server there or that circuit put in or whatever the case might be? And yes, it's confirmed it's there. Great. See you at 8:00. Or it's no, they delayed it by 3 weeks. Okay, great. Now I know I'm not going to send the guy out there to find out. I can now reschedule him for something else, right? Yeah. And not miss out on that potential billable time.
I mean, such a real world example for today, those hardware delays, right? Like, who knows what's going to happen at this point in the environment. So, all right. So there's this other like kind of redheaded stepchild out there too that's similar to all these things, right? It's a bucket of hours. Yeah. So this is not even T&E, right? This is just we're going to sell to you, client, a bucket of 100 hours or something, right? Yeah. And you're going to sign off on it. We're going to bill you as they're incurred or as they're used, and so. That's a different variant of T&E, but it's equally as both cumbersome, kind of bad. I'll just go ahead and say it. I remember just a lot of conversations where sales sales, let's just sell them a bucket of hours, and engineering leadership is like, no, hard no. Right. We're not doing that ever. Do y'all run into that at all anymore, or are y'all kind of?
So what we did, we used to do the bucket of hours, right? We called them block of hours.
Yeah, right.
And
that's a much more refined way of explaining it, a block.
The other thing that we did with it when we did it was we didn't expire them, and we used to sell on that, right? So we would be like, yeah, you buy 100 hours and they never expire. You do whatever you want. Yeah, for perpetuity, and it was awful. We changed we went to, we call it retainer. So it's a bucket of money. And why that's better is we still put a rate that they can get engineering work done. So like kind of that hourly, that T&E. But we limit it to what we will do with it. And it's basically break fix. So
Gotcha.
If you have a problem and you can call in, and our support team will help you, and we'll just bill against that. But if you call in and you have something bigger, then we're going to go ahead and scope it as a fixed fee project, and then we'll invoice it against that retainer. So we'll end against the retainer first, and then if there's there's more, just depending on how much is in the retainer, right? Part of it might go to a retainer, and part of it might go to them. Yeah. So when we switched to that model, we were actually able to still give that ask of that bucket, but and salespeople love it. They love to say, well, I just want to put an extra 10 grand in. They'll figure that out with. We're able to put that in, and we also put a year expiration. So when you purchase, if you don't use it within a year, it expires. But we still can do fixed fee. So we can do fixed fee against the retainer dollar amount. So we get around that T&E. So that's how we.
Yeah, that's a much more refined way of doing it. For sure. But again, like that's that it really does come back to like a level of maturity, right? And really, what we're trying to do on this podcast is bring people that have been there, kind of done it, and say, hey, like we made this mistake, or like we had billable hours or a block of time in perpetuity. We changed that. Right. So if anyone's doing that today, they can look at it and say, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't do that. Right.
I love though. It was like, this customer hasn't called us in 4 years and they bought 100 hours.
Right.
We needed oh no.
That was a huge deal when we sold it. Not anymore.
We
done spent that money.
Now we have to honor it, but that money's gone.
Yeah. Well, I think you made up another really good point is, all right, so say we're pricing projects out, T&E, fixed fee, and leadership says we're going to stop doing that hourly based pricing. We're going to go to this more outcome. Like it's not so much about making the decision. That decision can be made pretty quickly, but it's like the transition. It's the communication to internal sales. Like, did you find that when you made that transition, like was it hard on sales to make that transition? And did you have to equip them in any sort of way to then start talking about projects differently?
Yeah.
Like what did you?
Yeah. Well, so I would say a couple of things with that is, one of the things sometimes that isn't thought about is, we can put certain things in a box. So, you got the customer that always buys it. They use that really well. It works for both of us. We can stick them in a box and say, all right, fine. For them, we'll keep on doing that. But these other customers, it's not working for. So that's what we're going to target first. And those customers don't even know it. We're just not going to sell it ever, right? So we can avoid that. So that's kind of one of the things is just kind of realizing that we don't have to treat everybody the same with it. And then really, just like anything else, I think with sales or engineers, when you can talk to them on the individual level, and, find out what their concerns are, and then see if you can kind of mitigate any of those, they were much more accepting of it. When we did the retainer, it was, we knew we had a problem. We knew we needed to change it.
Right.
But a lot of that was some of that communication. Instead of saying, hey, look, we're just not going to do this anymore. It was, how are you guys using it? Why do you still need this? And then, putting the time in to really kind of turn around our heads and say, what's some of our options? I remember at the time I was kind of thinking about, how do lawyers do this? I got a buddy who's a lawyer, and we talk about some of this stuff a lot. And he said, and I was just kind of thinking about that. And it's like, lawyers do a retainer, right? They're not just sitting around. And that kind of was part of it, and said, hey, what if we have the bucket of money, right? So it's not a bucket of hours, it's a bucket of money. You're still able to kind of accomplish all those things that you want to accomplish, but we're also going to be able to accomplish what we need to.
Have you gotten to the point like lawyers where they bill every 15 minutes, like, crazy amount of time? You're like, man, I just had one phone call with them, and
well, so I know this is gonna be a little bit aside, but my lawyer buddy, he book, it's every 15 minutes, and he's walking his dog, and he's billing, and so like he is like, by September I had over 2,000 hours, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if our engineers did that, I'd be all for T&E, right? Because they would be billing all the time.
Right.
But it's just a different type of model, right?
Well, I know, but like, who knows? One day, right? Like, you kind of have all this mind share and like the trajectory in which the solutions are going, right? It's getting away from as much product. Like, there's always going to be some level of material and product, but like, you start changing the conversation to outcomes-based conversations, and like, it's not so much about speeds and feeds anymore, or actually it's not at all, right? That just becomes like a supporting act in delivering the outcome, right? And so, it's really interesting just to continue to watch the progression from, let's sell all hardware to let's just sell just managed services to look like all these, like, the services are where the money's at, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's where all the money's being made, especially today. One, because you can't get hardware, so you can't actually invoice for it. So who knows? But I was talking to another services leader, and he was, like, rule of thumb, like, they're looking for like 1.75 million of like gross margin per engineer, pre-sales engineer. So like, you're never going to get that with product. You have a much better chance of getting there with services and right. And so like, that's why I think these conversations are extremely helpful, because you want to make it easy to sell services for your sales team. You want to make it easy for your pre-sales team to kind of craft the solutions to get to those outcomes, and you want it to be easy on your engineering team to understand what were all the building blocks that went into this design and the solution, right? And so, because again, that's where the growth is, and that's where and again, you're owning a lot of this, right? You're owning PS and MS, and we haven't even dove into like third party and all the recurring sides of things, right? And so I think that's another podcast for our 2 billion subscribers to listen to.
You're going to get a lot of requests for that one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool, man. Well, so let's kind of put a bow on this. One thing that we like to do is you've been doing this for a long time. What's a practical thing that an ISV, a VAR, and MSP can do to kind of help up their services game, if you will? What would be, you came in there day one, what's one thing you tell them to do?
Yeah. So one of the things, like you just said, some of your greatest margin can be based on services, but that also is going to be your greatest cost, because you have to hire engineers to deliver. And so one of the big things is managing that cost. Some organizations, again, that have maybe a legacy of or leadership that understands product and selling and reselling that stuff, doesn't necessarily, they think they need as many engineers because they're going to sell this, and then they have to have the engineer on the ready to go. Right. So I'd say just one of kind of the practical advices is, when you're staffing your engineering staff and looking at what you need to look at what do you have to deliver like today, and what is likely you're going to deliver in the next 2 months, 3 months. And that's really so you can keep that cost down. And I know that, right, so the pushback I sometimes would get with saying that is like, yeah, but we also, I can't just have a route switch guy, because what happens when we sell the call manager? What are we going to do? Right. And what you should do is go out and get yourself some good partners, right? So you don't have to be competing partners. What we've done, I'm fortunately enough that I have partners that are in non-competing geographical areas, and so we all kind of work together. That when I do need that UC engineer that I don't have on staff, and it's one project, and I don't necessarily want to hire somebody for 50 hours worth of work, I can then go pull from them and get it. Now, the cost might be higher. Of course, it is higher than if I had the engineer for the project cost, but my overall cost long term is much less, right? I don't have to pay an engineer a full-time salary to do 20% of, work for the whole year.
Yeah. So understanding that pipeline is a huge part of that, right?
Big part of it. Know what's coming and make sure you staff for what's coming versus what the sales guys tell you is going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dennis, man, you're again, nothing but good things to say about you, and you've been in this industry, and I think we worked at the same company back in the day, right? And didn't even know it. But you've been from engineering to PMO to now leading a pretty diverse team across multiple areas and being very successful at it. So thank you for taking some time to talk to us and kind of share some of that knowledge and that tribal experience that you have over at IE. So if anyone wants to talk to you about this more, if they're just staying up at night thinking about how do I price services and they want to talk to Dennis, what's the best way to reach out to you and get in contact?
Yeah, appreciate that. So our company website is ineteng.com, and I just spell it INETENG.com.
Yep.
It's always like, what'd you say? So I recommend everybody kind of checking out who we are. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. So just Dennis Manfra. There's not a lot of us. Manfra's out there on LinkedIn. So Manfra. Yep.
Awesome, man. Well, again, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for subscribing to the podcast. If you are not subscribing to it, you can find us on scopestack.io/podcast, and there's a way to subscribe to all the new episodes on a number of different channels, right? So Spotify and Amazon and Apple and Google something or another. So there's a bunch of them out there, right? You just choose your flavor. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the ScopeStack team or again, reach out to Dennis if this particular topic pertains to you. So again, thank you everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.